Anger management, the troubled diplomatic relationship between India and Pakistan. I am just sharing a short background for many of us who may not be aware of what the context of the book is about. It will just make it easier for our speakers. So on 7th of August 2019, the High Commissioner Ajay Bisaria was expelled from Islamabad. The first time an Indian head of mission had been asked to leave Pakistan. His expulsion marked yet another low in the troubled relationship between two neighbors. The latest diplomatic row followed the dismantling of Article 370 in the state of Jammu and Kashmir, but the hostility that had been increasing with the Pakistani terror attack in Pulwama, followed by the Indian airstrike on the terrorists in Balakot. So, there were lots of events which led to this, and that is something what the book is trying to talk about and address, because the author, Ajay Bisaria, was India's top diplomat in Pakistan when these incidents took place. Ajay Bisaria is, as we know, an Indian diplomat. He has also served as High Commissioner of India to Canada. He, as the book is all about, he was High Commissioner of India to Pakistan from December 2017 to February 2020. He also worked as a Soviet internal affairs specialist in the months leading to the dissolution of the USSR. So he's been fortunate to witness another world event happening very closely. In conversation, Mr. Bisaria was also the private secretary to the Prime Minister Atal Bihari Vajpayee from 1999 to 2004 for the whole of Mr. Vajpayee's term. So, ladies and gentlemen, Ambassador Ajay Bisaria. And could we welcome him with a bouquet of flowers? And could I request Mrs. Sindhu Mishra to welcome the author this evening. Thank you, Sindhuji. And in conversation with Ambassador Bisaria, we have Ambassador Manjeev Puri. Manjeev Puri joined the Indian Foreign Service in 1982. His last posting before retirement, believe it or not, was as India's ambassador to Nepal, another neighboring country. Perhaps if there is time, we could hear about India's ties with Nepal as well, because I think that is also something which is very interesting. Or maybe we can have this discussion at another time. He has represented India in Brussels as ambassador to the EU, Belgium and Luxembourg. He has served in New York as ambassador and deputy permanent representative of India to the UN. On the one of his major areas of his profession and experience focuses on environment, in particular climate change and sustainable development. He was a key member of India's delegation at various climate change negotiations. Post-retirement, he is often seen on TV discussing climate change and foreign issues. He is also a distinguished fellow of TERI. Ladies and gentlemen, Ambassador Manjeev Puri. Could I request Mrs. Padma Chhip to welcome him, please? Thank you, Padmaji. Anger management. I leave the author and our guest to engage with each other and tell us more about this very important, interesting, and perhaps intriguing subject, something which we are also emotionally attached with, our neighbor, Pakistan. Thank you.
Sanjana, thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, may I request you first of all to look at this wonderful 478-page book. Ajay, please stand up, take a bow. Thank you, Ajay. So for all the CV that she read out, I am here basically because I'm Ajay's friend and absolutely honored to be so. And Sanjana, thank you for importing someone from the competitive colony a second time over to do a book review here. I'm very delighted. There must be something good. There must be something good that I can do. I'm not writing a book and I haven't written one. So ladies and gentlemen, we'll get to anger management and we'll get to a lot of that. And Ajay's vast experience and what he's put down. But I just want you all to focus on 2 or 3 things. One, Pakistan, whether we like it or not, at least till my generation, is not going to go out of our blood. Sir, so whether it is what you say, we are on top, they are below, or they are on top, we are below, I don't know the answers. Somebody here just told me that his greatest wonderful thing was to have gone back to the village from where the forefathers came. The fact that friends come and stay for 6 months. Each and every one of us, I think, sitting here, many people who haven't been would love to go. There's a kind of bond. This is very, very special. And perhaps for those of us who come from Eastern India, the same exists with Bangladesh, the erstwhile East Pakistan. Perhaps not even so with Nepal, not even so with Sri Lanka. There is this question of partition, whether we like it or not. But Ajay, let me start by asking you a question. I don't know how many of you saw the film, 2003 film called Anger Management. So you haven't. Anger Management. Was this title your choice? Pakistan and India, and you heard what our friend here had to say, on top, below, this, that and the other. Really speaking, is it really our anger that we need to manage? What do you have to say about that?
Well, thanks, Manjeev. But let me start by thanking the Vasant Vihar Club. Great to be here and great to be talking of a very tough neighbor with very benign neighbors of Vasant Vihar. We moved into F10 sector just last year, so it's great to be here and have this conversation. And even though somebody from a competing colony is interrogating me, I'm sure we're going to be having a great candid conversation. So Manjeev, you know, why anger management? It's a title I suggested. And of course, the marketing corollary benefit of it was that if the geopolitical buffs don't buy it, the self-help people will buy it. And, you know, some while ago, I was at the Delhi airport and I saw it listed as number 19 in the business chart. So I said, you know, business chart, is this a business book? I asked the salesman. He said, sir, management ki kitab hai. So those are the corollary benefits. But the reason I chose this topic was when I surveyed the whole story, there's a lot of anger in this relationship. Certainly from the foundational anger of 1 million people butchered, 15 million people displaced, to the 4 wars, to India's very legitimate anger about terrorism and so on. And equally, when we talk of policy, we say that we can't resolve this conundrum, it's too complex, but we can perhaps manage it so that it doesn't become a sort of conflagration. So this is, you know, also a kind of trope in policy circles. So we just playfully combine the two. So, you know, I suggest we don't stretch that analogy too much, because a lot of people ask me whose anger is to be managed and isn't it legitimate to be angry with that wretched country, and, you know, vice versa. Also, there's an interesting story about this. P.N. Haksar, who was Mrs. Gandhi's chief political sage counselor, he was asked, apparently in 1971, he gave her the counsel that he said statesmanship is about 2 things. One is about managing or expressing anger. there's anger among people, you have to allow it expression. And the second is about managing it. And often leaders forget the second part, they go on with the first, so you let out that anger, you don't manage it. So in many ways, I think diplomacy is also about managing anger. And if there is a kind of advocacy here, it is that let's be led by our long-term interests, not by our short-term passions in managing this relationship.
Ajay, that's really well said. But I'm very glad that you used this word management in the way you did. So guys, all of you should know, a St. Stephen's College graduate, a Princetonian Master of Public Administration, perhaps the only officer of the Foreign Service who's worked with the World Bank. He obviously knows a lot about management. But Ajay, you're right. It's also the question of anger. But you know, I want to tell you all, if you can, please procure the book. If for whatever reason 479 pages seems a little daunting, do at least pick it up and read it, because it's my considered view, what Ajay has done is he hasn't written an autobiography. It isn't about his 12, 13, 15 months in Pakistan. There are elements where he talks about himself and his relationship, but it's actually in 479 pages, the 75 years history of India-Pakistan relations, narrated most beautifully, taken from what he says are authentic sources, the first people who were there, but written in a most readable and wonderful style. It is perhaps, I would say, the one book that for anyone who thinks that he or she has an interest in strategic affairs, in foreign policy, should buy and keep on his shelf for Pakistan. It's actually from 1947 to the present. Ajay, congratulations for doing this. Not just I did this and I did that, but you know, what is it that's happened? And I say this recognizing the fact that we have lots of people also from the Foreign Service, Mr. Ranade, China, and all those expertise. So
this plug is completely unrehearsed and not paid for. Thank you, Manjeev.
But it is being recorded.
yeah, and but it's a plug which must and needs to be made, because you know, people like us who come out of these professions, obviously there is something to write autobiographical. Most of it are, you know, good titillating stories, if I may say, for a certain time frame. But this book has timelessness in it. And that's, Ajay, particularly important. Congratulations to you. So as we wind up this hour or so, that's the time we have, roughly 45 minutes. You know, it would be my endeavor that you all should also participate, Ajay, if you agree with me there, because this is a subject which is very close to everyone. So I have read the book, noted a few things, and I will certainly ask Ajay some specific aspects, but it's also to trigger off ideas in all of you. So Ajay, let me start towards the beginning of this book. Right at the beginning, we're talking about 1947, 48, the first few years. And Ajay mentioned something very interesting, which perhaps all of us sitting here need to somehow understand. And he talks about Pakistan having veered from being a Muslim state to being an Islamic state. Explain that, Ajay.
Yes, so you know, it was an interesting distinction that was made by the first Indian High Commissioner to Pakistan, Sri Prakash. And Sri Prakash had the background of being a Congress worker and a friend of Jawaharlal Nehru, who really sent him there, but also a friend of Jinnah, with whom he was in various working committees when they were in the provisional government in India. And he makes that distinction, and he once goes to Jinnah, and he says that, you know, you are talking about an Islamic country, and, you know, what is this narrative? And this is early in the game in 1948. And Jinnah said, I never said that. I never said that. It is, you know, so he goes back. He researches it, and in fact, he at that point says, but maybe Liaquat Ali Khan said so. So he said, you fight it out with Liaquat Ali Khan, the Prime Minister. Jinnah is at this point the Governor General. I didn't say it. So he then comes to the conclusion that Jinnah had in mind that this would be a homeland for the Muslims, but not an Islamic country. Right in the beginning, and that Jinnah was averse to the idea. Later, the objectives resolution, which is passed by Pakistan in a couple of years later, Jinnah had seen its draft, and somebody in Pakistan told me, a researcher, that Jinnah saw this draft when he was on his sick bed in Balochistan Ziyarat, and he flung it on the floor in anger. He didn't want to create an Islamic country. And his initial idea was that it would be a homeland for Muslims, and his belief, which some historians like Aisha Jalal said was only a negotiating tactic, was that the Hindus and Muslims were two separate nations, and the Muslims needed a homeland. But he did not want to create an Islamic country. So this is the distinction the first High Commissioner makes in his interpretation of how Pakistan's founders were taking Pakistan in which direction.
Very interesting, Ajay, what you say. I also read this piece and I read it twice over. Sri Prakash came from what we today call Uttar Pradesh. Liaquat Ali Khan, if you know, didn't come from Pakistan, Punjab. He was also from Uttar Pradesh. And I don't know how many of you know, but his most well-known wife came from a Pahadi family, a Christian who got converted. And really, Isabella Thornton, the famous Lucknow College, all of that. Many of these things are pretty much unknown to all of us as to how these things happened. So Ajay, this is a very interesting point that you say. But you know, if I take you to something else which was alluded to by you in your book, this partition is not just a simple matter of what was sown in 1857, the Abrahamic concepts of religions, not understanding caste, ethnicity, such divisions in our country, and its culmination, but part of a kind of great game. Great game 2, 1, 1.5, I don't know the answers. And in that, perhaps there was an inevitability of, you can call it Islam, Muslim, whatever it is, but that particular game. And it was Sri Prakasha who was perhaps a little bit, let me say, innocent of understanding these particular things, no matter that he was a big congressman and a good politician. What would you say to that?
Yes, you know, the whole idea of the great game feeding into this partition moment it comes into play much later in the 40s, and even if in the British archives, which are now opened, and Chandrasekhar Dasgupta has done some excellent research on it, but even earlier there was some research. So it was Lord Wavell who, from 43 to 46, he was convinced that it was in the British national interest to create a sort of state or northwest of India, which would be more amenable than Nehru's India in taking care of British interests, which were at that point to stave off communism from the north and to take care of the Middle East or West Asian oil interests. So this idea was floating around. There was a counter idea by the later Field Marshal Auchinleck, who felt that a united Indian army would be a much better deal. But the idea that a separate homeland to be given to Jinnah would be in the British national interest, one, and in somewhere around 1945, Lord Wavell had this conversation with then PM Churchill, managed to persuade him, and then this became the dominant view, that it won't harm us to give away this Muslim homeland. So in the whole Hindu-Muslim idea, which was being, of course, promoted and by Jinnah, particularly from 1940, also was the British national interest. And that was a major factor, because it is the British who had a choice after dividing and ruling whether they divide and quit. They could well have gone with the cabinet mission plan and saying that we'll have a loose confederation, but we won't divide and quit. You guys decide after we leave. So I think that counterfactual is important to remember, that there was a British national interest being served in dividing India.
Ajay, well done, because it's important for us, even 75 years later, to understand some of these things. And you very nicely alluded to oil interests, the Middle East, communism, several factors. But I want to take you to this beginning. Sri Prakasha, nostalgia, Liaquat Ali was a friend. I think his deputy at some point in the provincial Congress set up there. Why have most of our high commissioners, if I may use the expressions used today, quote unquote, been soft on Pakistan?
I think that is a debate that we've had often. And one of the points I make in my book is that Pakistan doesn't leave you untouched. So you come out either on one end of the spectrum, which is that you're guided by the people to people love and the strong cultural affinity, and you come out softer, or you also come out, let's say, like Mani Shankar Iyer, but you could also come out on the other end of the spectrum, like our former High Commissioner Satish Chandra, who is completely hard on Pakistan. So it is a unique experience because it's a surreal kind of country, it's an abnormal country, and serving there, you kind of develop some extreme views on how to deal with Pakistan. So I thought I should try to be objective and listen to all these voices, but try not to be swayed in one or the other direction.
Ajay, very, very interesting. There are some 20 odd people who've been high commissioners to Pakistan, and we have one good Satish Chandra doing the other way around. My next question is another one. Would you not agree that most Indian prime ministers, barring perhaps one, if I may again use this expression, want to do a deal with Pakistan?
Absolutely. I would make that argument that from Nehru to Modi, the political instinct of India's leaders has been more that, can I solve this conundrum? Can I untie this knot somehow? That is politically sexier than saying, I fixed them. I taught them a lesson. So whether it was Vajpayee going on in 1999 after the explosions, or Modi going in 2015 on an instinct from Kabul to meet Nawaz Sharif in Lahore, I think it is the same instinct. And we often forget that even with Prime Minister Modi, the first 2 years were spent in trying very sincerely to build this relation, to untie this knot. He had Nawaz Sharif coming in for his inauguration in 2014. He met him 5 times in different world capitals, and then of course he went to Lahore. So I think people often learn the hard way, but not for want of trying. And every Prime Minister in some way or the other has tried to solve this problem.
I agree with you there, and I think there is, as you said, there is a certain amount of political instinct and a feeling that this would result in a kind of greater recognition, even for me or she. One notable Prime Minister perhaps did not do this, who resulted in the creation of another country. It's very interesting. We tend to almost forget many of these kind of things. Ajay, on High Commissioners, let me ask you another question. There's a very nice little piece that Ajay has written about his interactions with people there. And one of them is that somebody turns around and tells him, when talking about one of his predecessors, hey, why do you guys always send these highfalutin Brahmins from South India who intellectually dominate us and show us down? Why do you send some good Punjabi guys? Well, there was Satinder Lamba, there was Sharad Sabharwal, but why do you send us Punjabi guys? But my question to you, Ajay, is not that. Why haven't we sent a Sikh as High Commissioner to Pakistan?
I think it's a great question, and I think it is accidental because, as you know, in our service, it's fairly blind to what the ethnicity. But I think the way the relationship is, it won't make a huge difference. I had a choice. I was asked for the defense attaché. We had a Sikh defense attaché for the first time, and I strongly argued for having one because I said it doesn't matter. it's a different matter that in Pakistan they try to treat him differently, try to co-opt him, try to speak in Punjabi, check him out. But he was from the Indian Army, from the best traditions, and he was not swayed by any of the great charm. But again, that incident you mentioned, there was a conversation earlier that should we try and charm Pakistan by sending a Punjabi who speaks in Punjabi and quotes Urdu Shairi? There have been many who've done that. But Pakistan prefers not to have that. They have said that, you should treat us like a foreign country. And talking to them in English and not in Punjabi in the meetings, and treating them as a foreign country, they respect that a little bit more. But this conversation I had with someone, and let's name them, who said, you sent Satyabrata Paul, who was a Bengali, and he was so smart, and then you said Shiv Shankar Menon, he was so smart, and you sent all these South Indians, and you try to intellectually kind of browbeat us and show us down. So why don't you send Punjabi? So it was half in jest, but I think that was a point that they often make.
Point accepted. Bharti, do you think it was an absolute coincidence that this gentleman turned up in Islamabad there? Perfectly fine. Bharti Chaturvedi is better half, one of Delhi's most well-known environmentalists, activists and so on. Delighted to have you here, Bharti. Ajay, this thing that we've just mentioned about people's relationships and so on, I can just tell you, I have never served in Pakistan, but my wife and I have been there once for the shadi of friends of ours, children, who were with us in South Africa. They were all originally from India, the Gujarat part, but then the wife's family settled in Lahore. The husband's family went off to South Africa. The way we were looked after, and we knew nobody, the friendships remain till today. And I must remember the president of your RWA telling me, the most hospitable guys, that's the word that comes to us. My first experience of dealing with the Pakistanis was General Ziaul Haq, who came here for the non-aligned summit. I was among the young officers who was on duty there, and my colleague T.C.A. Raghavan, one of his predecessors, was the liaison officer to Ziaul Haq. Ziaul Haq was put up in the then Oberoi Hotel, even now the famous Oberoi Hotel. I was at a bit of a loose end looking after a delegation from Yemen. So I went to meet Raghavan, who was my batchmate, and Ziaul Haq came down. He spent 5 minutes chatting with me. At that time, I had no idea about Sikhs, this, that, and the other. But that's the nature of the way these things happen. Ajay, I want to tell you a little story. When people came to know I was going to be talking to you on this, two of your predecessors met me a few days back. And both of them had a Sikh driver from the CISF called Kaptan Singh. And every one of them told me, Ajay se ye पूछना. मैंने कहा क्या? कि whenever we went to meet the Sharifs, Nawaz or Shehbaz Sharif, and Kaptan Singh was driving the car, they were standing outside, which Pakistanis always do as a matter of their upbringing. They would leave the porch, go across to the driver's side, shake hands with Kaptan Singh. Is it only because of this Sikh business? But then someone said something very interesting. The Pakistanis actually want diversity, and that's what the Sikhs show to them in the biggest sort of manner that was possible. But let's leave that out. Ajay, let me turn to something else, and then all of you please pitch in. Please ask things that you want to, because here is somebody who has the most recent experience. He's the last High Commissioner there. We haven't had a High Commissioner there. It's these experiences. Remember one thing. Even during the two wars and 1948, there was no expulsion of High Commissioners. As Ajay puts it in his book, they kind of forgot that these guys had to be expelled. Both sides perhaps. It was only Kashmir, when there was in a sense Aman, that somebody decided, which really meant that instead of the military, the civil guys were acting. And so they decided that Ajay has got to go out, which is characters like us. But Ajay, I want to leave a thought with you. I have had much experience of dealing with the Pakistanis, including those names that you hear very often in most derisive terms here in India at the United Nations. If I leave out this one subject, Kashmir, and let me say it isn't that subject of great importance there. There's just this one particular issue, and that issue is difficult to manage. There's no answer to it. But otherwise, on all subjects, it is the one developing country, at least from our neighborhood, with whom we vibe and act exactly in consonance. In fact, if I can mention to you, there's this thing called Group of 77, wide which negotiations happen in the UN. The developed countries and the developing countries interact. If a Pakistani chairs the G77, Indian diplomats don't need to come. It will be what you want, which will be done. How does that happen?
I think that just underlines the kind of abnormal relationship and the abnormal division. Because in every sense, as you're saying, they are a South Asian country of 250 million people, so their interests on the global commons, whether it's climate change or trade or development or South-South cooperation, are very much aligned to ours. Or they often, I suspect, cut and paste our policy notes and use them because the issues are similar. What divides us is the Pakistan army. Because of this structural aberration of the army from Pakistan's birth and early years, having taken over the country and not allowed, democratic expression, the interests of the army get translated into everything else, and it decided that its interests lay in this animosity with India. And that became the defining official narrative and so on. So because of that, the natural hostility, India being the natural enemy, and the poison also seeps into the popular mind, in the general public, even though we see so many examples of goodwill and cultural affinity and friendship and warmth, there is also that poison of saying that India aapka dushman desh hai, dushman mulk narrative. Finds its way into a lot of people. We tend to meet the elites, but a significant section of the population does believe that India is the enemy. But again, many caveats there. All that is changing with the demographics. Now, younger people, if you see some of the Pakistani podcasts and so on, are questioning the official narrative and seeing the differential between the two countries and have common aspirations and saying, why can't we do things like launching the Chandrayaan or having a UPI system or having a G20 summit?
Ajay, you're very right. I think you touched upon a very important element. Military coups, Pakistan is not the first country that did it. It's also not the largest country that did it. Larger than Pakistan is Indonesia, which had military rule for about 30 years. Yet, have you thought about this? It seems to be the only country where this business of disillusionment with the military, at best, is what we see today. There is some disillusionment, but it doesn't happen. My understanding, Ajay, is, and this is exactly the point that you said, in most countries, militaries take over promising what is called good governance. In 5 to 10 years, that veneer pulls off. Pakistan is the only place where the army says there's an enemy and we are supporting it. It's a very peculiar kind of thing. So I don't know the answers. But let me ask you this. You mentioned young people asking about Chandrayaan. Some young people, some 30 years back said, ek aur explosion hum bhi kar dete hain, and they did it. I believe in what you are saying, that while the macro figures would show that Pakistan would be among the 7-8 largest countries in the world, even in GDP in aggregate terms, among the 12-13 largest countries in the world, purely driven by population sizes. The fact is that it's working at a slower and slower pace and losing out. Again, going back to my own little experience when we were there, I took a bus on 2 occasions, the equivalent of the old DTC. Both places the conductor refused to take any money from me, which is very normal in a place like Lahore. But one guy asked me, "Aap Delhi se aate hain?" वो शहर है जहां बहुत बड़ी मस्जिद है. Clueless. In the parties that we went to, those Pakistanis who had been in the world, they turned around and asked me questions. I'm talking about 25 years back or 20 years back. They asked me questions about Bangalore, which was then the growing place. Those who didn't know anything had absolutely no clue. And I feel that actually the distance in the people is growing. But Ajay, what is your view on this important thing? That the army, this enemy business, slowly but surely, as we get to the next generation, social media, understanding. I mean, today people are questioning the army. Small amounts, but they are. We all travel abroad, you meet a Pakistani taxi driver, the first thing he says is, Awam to Imran ke saath hai. But then he also says, humko reality bhi pata hai. But do you, when you were there and in your other experiences, including in Canada, where there's a large population, do you get the feeling that the people might just be able in time, hopefully sooner, be able to get over those who don't want people to have their links?
Yeah, so there are two parts to it. And let's come to contemporary Pakistan to, put that lens on it. One is definitely that the people are sullen, angry about a lot of things the army is doing, including managing this relationship with India. But the army also is changing for the reason that Pakistan is going through a poly crisis at least from 2021. And it faces a huge political crisis, a huge security crisis. It can manage the political crisis, as they say, jang kabhi jeeti nahi, election kabhi hara nahi, for the Pakistan army. It can manage the security crisis, but it can't manage the economic crisis because it just hasn't developed a business model. I was speaking to a corporate audience yesterday and I said, if you were a creditor of a company called Hybrid Pakistan, you would fire the board of directors. The board of directors is the Pakistan Army. The army chief is the CEO and chairman of the board. He runs the country. They hire a poor chief operating officer, which is the prime minister. Previous chief operating operating officers are either in jail or dead or in exile. But the problem is it's a failing company. It doesn't listen to its stakeholders, which is the people and the voters. It has no business model. It spends more than it earns. It imports more than it exports. So 24 times it's been to the IMF. It's going to go for the 24th loan of $8 billion because it can't survive without that. So I think the central problem is the way the army manages. People are sullen about it. Two very interesting things have happened in the last 1 week. Two statements by two of Pakistan's most important civilian leaders, which, reflects what Pakistan is, its history, and also its relationship with India. One is Imran Khan saying from jail in an interview that there is a strong parallel between 1971 and today. Who was the traitor? Was it General Yahya Khan, who took over power, the dictator, or was it Mujibur Rahman, who was in their popular narrative, the secessionist leader? And implicitly he is saying that, again, today you've done the same thing. You've held an election, the people voted for one leader, you put him in jail, as you put Mujibur Rahman in jail. So Imran Khan is that leader, and General Asim Munir is that traitor who put him in jail because he didn't want to listen to the voice of the people. But what happened? Pakistan broke up at that point. So, this is the statement. But also saying that it wasn't India that was responsible, it was we who were responsible. Nawaz Sharif takes over as the president of the Pakistan Muslim League 2 days ago. He makes a similar statement, and I think it's very significant. He says that I did the explosions, nuclear explosions in 98. 99, I invited Prime Minister Vajpayee, he came, but we violated that Lahore agreement. and he says, "Hamara kasoor tha." We are responsible. He's gone further than any other leader. So what Nawaz Sharif is now signaling, and that is the hope for this year, that he is saying that can we turn the clock back to 1999? You know, these jokers got rid of me. I was the prime minister. They got rid of me again in 2017 when I was the elected prime minister. Can we go back to 1999 when Vajpayee came in the bus and start over? So he's implying that this army, and he's the junior partner right now of the army. He came on the back of the army, but he's still defying them. So the popular mood is to defy the army, whether you're an opposition parliament, leader locked up in jail, or you're the junior partner who came riding on their back into power.
No, very well said, Ajay. It's a reflection of times, but as they say, trust but verify. That's particularly important, and many of our times here, leaders, and in fact, global opinion and global pressures tend to vitiate this link between trust and verify. So we'll see what happens to that. Let me throw this open. Come on.
May I?
Sir, certainly you will, but nobody else. Oh, very good, excellent. Sir, you are the first.
Okay. Ajay ji, can any achievable plan bring a permanent peace between India and Pakistan?
So I think the permanent peace is a bridge too far. And I think what in today's context we should be talking about is stabilizing this relationship. So, now purely speaking from our selfish interests, what is India's interest? We don't want this country of 250 million, which has fought 4 wars with us, become what Gaza became to Israel on the 7th of October. So we want a Pakistan that ceases to be a terrorist threat. That is our number one priority. Everything else may be welcome, but it is not an immediate priority, whether it's trade or good people-to-people relations. All that is welcome. And I think that comes through a two-track policy from India's point of view. So if I was the Tsar advising both countries today, I would tell India that, a two-track policy, zero tolerance to terrorism, a message to Pakistan that anything like Pulwama, you get a Balakot kind of response. But at the same time, some calibrated and selective engagement with Pakistan on our terms, with basic conditions. To Pakistan, I would advise that they have to normalize for themselves more than anyone else, but that will help their relations with other countries. So by the army reducing its role in the domestic polity and economy, and by the army ceasing to export terrorism or use terrorists as an instrument of state policy. So I think that is the direction we need to move.
A supplementary question, simple one. What was your most pleasant moment when you entered Islamabad and joined as the High Commissioner of India?
So it was certainly a very exciting job for any Indian diplomat. I had, as Manjeev pointed out, 24 predecessors. So many of them greats whom we've admired in the service. So I was very honored to be there. And it was a tough time in the relationship, but my brief from the Prime Minister was a fairly decent one of looking for avenues for peace. There was also a brief of creative diplomacy. So I think after reaching there, one of the first things I did is that I went to a literature festival and spoke there. And I think that was very pleasant because I said that our common enemy is poverty and we need to be fighting it together, not creating violence and terrorism. And suddenly the audience found it very interesting. They applauded that a lot because they felt that I would come up with a very tough message. But again, the tracks you speak of, the people to people track is something that we can leverage, exploit, use, because there is a great deal of goodwill there. What we do with the government is different.
Ajay, interesting. Ajay mentions in 1 or 2 pages some very interesting familial links with Pakistan. His mother's family going to Murray. Did we see a little bit of that in the literature festival?
Yes, so I carried this little slice of family history apart from the burden of subcontinental history, as I mentioned. My mother was in Pakistan my grandfather was posted in 1942, and in the summer of 42 she went to Murray, and to her that was the most exciting adventure of her life, which she related to me when I was in Pakistan when she was 90. She passed away since, but I went to Murray and I sent her pictures because that was her childhood memory and the most vivid one. So there are these, people to people connects which are very strong, but as policy makers, we have to be immune to these, we have to be coldly calculating of our national interest.
Very well put, Ajay, very well. Sir.
Thank you for a very nice conversation, sir. My name is Group Captain Ravinder Chitwal and I stay in F block. So now the question is on the K word, Kashmir. Now for India, the legal position is the instrument of accession in 1947. And what Pakistan keeps saying is the United Nations resolution. Where exactly, what is the real position? Who is right and who is wrong? Your comments on that.
That's a question we can spend 4 hours on. And I must start with this story of before I went to Pakistan, I met Mr. Lamba and he said, I'll give you one of the things he told me, he was my predecessor, one hack. Don't discuss Kashmir in Pakistan after 6 p.m. Because till 6 p.m. is all good. But if you've had a couple of whiskeys with the Pakistanis and you get into an argument on Kashmir, you'll bring the house down, there'll never be an answer. So I followed that to the T. I would never discuss the K word after 6 p.m., even if I had to during the day. But to answer your question is very simple. Of course we think we are right. The instrument of accession gave all of Jammu and Kashmir to us on the 26th of October. And Pakistan came in 47 and they took a part of it. Now, for us, all that is the UN resolutions was sequential. They had the first step was that Pakistan had to vacate what it had occupied before we talked of anything else. But in any case, they are all rendered irrelevant because in 72 Shimla Agreement and the Lahore Declaration 99, we've agreed to bilaterally resolve that issue. So, the UN resolutions being quoted makes no sense to us. And in any case now, they are talking about the UN resolutions would demand that Pakistan maintains the fiction that there's an independent country called AJK, Azad Jammu and Kashmir, and there is a central territory called Gilgit-Baltistan, and they are awaiting a plebiscite one day. And our position is they are part of our territory. This in 1994 we passed a parliamentary resolution. So I think globally, even if you forget India's case, we think we are right. The Pakistanis have their case. I think they're themselves not convinced they're right, but they have to maintain that fiction. The world doesn't buy it anymore. So if you talk about this conflict globally, including in the UN where Manjeev spent a lot of time, it's not an issue that is agitated much. So there is much clarity that there is a disagreement going on, but from India's point of view, the status quo has continued and is acceptable.
You're absolutely right, Ajay. Sir, in a sense, it's very much like a house dispute. 3/4 of it depends on occupation. You look at any global map, The portions that we think are ours are not marked as us. But the legality of things is exactly as what Ajay said. Ma'am, you want to ask a question? You are asking for the... You win. Okay, no. Sir, you want.
I further
We are
dwell
switching a little bit on the
I
left and
further
right.
dwell upon the question which is being asked. Had Maharaja Hari Singh taken a timely decision to merge with India, would India and Pakistan relationship would have been different than what it is today?
So I think that's a very interesting counterfactual to ask, but I make the argument in my book that solving the Kashmir problem is not enough. So I don't buy the argument that if we didn't have a Kashmir dispute, we wouldn't have had a problem with Pakistan. Because the central problem draws from Pakistan's identity crisis. There was a foundational identity crisis. Who are we? Are we Arab or are we South Asian? We are the other of India. So are we Indians or are we a completely different group? And the foundational belief, of course, was that Kashmir banega Pakistan, but also the two-nation theory. So there were a lot of fictions that Pakistan fed itself. And if its army had taken over, the army would have had some other cause or alibi to justify its own outsized role in Pakistan. So maybe there would be one less level of complication, but we can't make the argument that there would have been a perfect relationship then. But perhaps a relationship like we could have aspired to a better relationship in that case without a major stumbling block in the relationship.
Ajay, this is...
Sir, developing on the same statement you made earlier, that the partition of India into India and Pakistan was not really by the Indians or Muslims or Hindus, but it was the concept which the British had. What was Mahatma Gandhi doing that? He was such a actively participating in all that. Could he not see through that what the British are doing and this division and partition of India and Pakistan should not be done? He didn't say anything about that.
So I would say that, we shouldn't oversimplify that situation, that historical situation. There were multiple factors at play and there are multiple historical debates, including Pakistan as an idea came up in 1940 with the Lahore Resolution. So that idea was continuing and the British interest was also important. A lot of people feel that perhaps it was a failure of a power sharing agreement between Jinnah and Nehru more than anything else. But certainly it was all these factors that Jinnah had announced in 46 August, a direct action day. The kind of violence going on made it impossible for Mountbatten to backpedal at that point. But I think all these factors were at play, and it won't be fair to pull out one factor and call it the most important.
Ajay, extremely interesting. You mentioned the question of sundowner. That's what they say about Nepal, by the way. Surya as Nepal must. The same seems to apply to Pakistan. I like that. The second issue is identity. Believe me, it's across the place. Everybody has the same. But we need to understand, and I don't think we have reached that point as yet. We are a nation state in terms of these interactions with the world. Civilizational is a slightly different concept, and I don't think that these apply exactly similarly and in that very fashion. Anyway, that's the name of geopolitics. If all of that ended, I don't know whether Ajay and I would be employed in the foreign service, would go down to recruiting 2 people every year. Sir,
my family, my father's family, my mother's family are all from Rawalpindi. As a matter of fact, just 2 days ago, I got a video from Pakistan about which was my mother's area called Dugalpura, nearby number Chungi. But a bit of trivia. When partition came, my grandfather, my Dadaji, took his family and went to Baramulla where he owned a house. When the Razakars came, he came to Srinagar. My father was then studying law in Delhi University. So they were at the airport And Batra, the Deputy Prime Minister of Kashmir, came. He knew my grandfather. He said, Chaudhary Sahab, Delhi ja rahe ho? He said, ye हवाई जहाज में जगह मिल गई. कहना वो मैं जगह करता हूँ, ये चिट्ठी मैं दे रहा, ये दिल्ली जाके पंडित नेहरू ਨੂੰ दे देना, और बहुत जरूरी है. So he arrived in the evening. Next morning, he sat behind my father's cycle. They went to Teen Murti house. There was no security. There was nothing. They just drove in. They saw Nehru sitting in his study and working. They gave the Chaprasi the letter. Nehru came out 5 minutes later and said, thank you very much. We waited a long time for this letter. And can I offer you tea or something? They said no. That was the letter of accession.
Wow. That's incredible.
There you are. Thank you very much, sir.
But coming now, I wasn't born at that time. But coming to my question, there's a celebrated poet in Patiala who makes his house out of Patiala, Ustad Daman. He wrote a poetry on partition, and he said, "Tuadi akhiyan di lali dasdi hai." That is the redness of your eyes. He said, "Tuadi akhiyan di lali dasdi hai ki tusi bhi roye aur asi bhi roye." That's what a lot of us feel about partition, that it was unnecessary. But what are your opinions? Because this is something that is very controversial also.
Thank you, sir. Ajay, you want to say something?
Yeah.
At the back there. Lady.
I think great question, sir. And if you see my book, I've spent a lot of time on partition because I think it's not just the foundational moment. I've argued that partition and its memories have also made a journey through all these 76 years. And that's also been a story that's been looked at in different ways across the decades. And some of those ghosts still haunt us. You know, even in this election, we saw conversations about minorities of the kind that we had heard then. And that was a horrible moment of 1 million people being butchered and 15 million being completely displaced. But over the years, there were more migrations, there was minority issues, became political issues, and I think the memories of that partition were dealt with differently. So in the first decade, when we should have been the angriest at each other, was when we did the most constructive diplomacy. That was the irony. Till 1965, we had the Indus Waters Treaty signed after 10 years of negotiation in 1960. We were discussing a no-war pact. We'd signed a Nehru-Liaquat Pact in 1951, which prevented carnage in East Bengal. So there was a lot of constructive conversation. It was 1965 and the foolish idea of Ayub Khan to change the status quo in Kashmir, which put the poison in the relationship. But the partition moment is with us in a different form. Even now, culturally, the grandchildren of the partition generation are writing in different ways about the loss of partition. They're talking of objects, Aanchal Malhotra of the Bari family. She's been writing about it. Across the border, there's a writer, Anam Zakaria. She's a granddaughter of a partition family. They are interpreting it differently, and this cultural memory will be with us. But even 2 days ago, you got a video from across the border, and now borders are becoming less and less relevant. Because, there was a young group in Pakistan, I spoke to them, I said, you have a startup, you have people with memories, you just go and make a video of their home and send it to them, you'll be in business. There'll be a lot of people who aren't able to come and want that. Today, Hira Mandi is the most popular show in Pakistan. The army cannot ban it, and they love it, and they also love to hate it. Because they say that it's a great show, but they also say it's totally inauthentic.
Absolutely right. It's one of the things that you notice the moment you cross over. So you, sir, raised your hand.
Yes.
We'll take, Sanjana, how much time do we have?
Up to you all.
No, we are happy as long as he's happy. 7:30, so we'll take a break. Please.
Madam has been asking.
No, she will say the last word.
No, she's still got the word right now.
Let me say the last one.
Yeah, because she's the founder of this entire thing.
Sorry, good evening. Good evening, Mr. Bisaria. You talked about the control that the army has on the country, and that has been one of the central problems for many other issues. What is going to weaken that control? What are the signs of things that need to happen for that control to loosen? I mean, the economy is in tatters and disarray. There's a significant exodus out of Pakistan. And even then, with what has been happening with the elections, the army has actually tightened its control rather than beginning to realize that actually maybe its control is past its sell-by date. So what is going to need to happen for that control to weaken?
You know, at this point of time, Pakistan's army remains its dominant institution and completely in charge. But having said that, there are now cracks in this pillar. It's seeing a lot of dissent within. So all the branches, the Air Force, Army, even Navy, have been seeing purges, which means the leadership is trying to purge people who were either with Imran Khan or had a different point of view. So it's certainly happening. The civilian politicians, unfortunately, have not ganged together. So one way of putting the army back in the barracks is for all civilian politicians to do a contract and say, okay, we are with each other. Let's ask this wretched army to get back into the barracks because it's been trouble for all of us. But that doesn't happen. What happens is that each civilian politician in turn rides on the back of the army, does a deal with them and say, put the other guy in jail, let me be in power and I will try to fix it. And then 3 years later they realize that they aren't able to govern. So can we, go back and can we push back, and the army gets rid of them. So at this point of time, the army is in charge, strongly in control, but the people are angry, the politicians are angry, the judiciary is pushing back. The 5 judges of the court recently wrote a letter saying that everything, we are being blackmailed, all key decisions that we make, we were blackmailed by the army. So the judiciary and the opposition is pushing back. The people are very angry with the army, but structurally it remains a very strong force, so it's not going anywhere very soon.
Interesting, Ajay. You just thrown a hint. They need to have a PAK alliance. To you.
So I have, the question is somewhat related, but if you look at Pakistan right now, one, the economy, you needed the IMF bailout, you have tearaway inflation, right? Pakistani rupees at an all-time, it's a banana republic almost, without sounding a bit cocky. We are still an economy. They are actually a non-entity in the global economy. Second, in terms of where they're positioned in the geopolitical scheme of things, yes, you have the army, you have different warring factions, you have ISI pursuing its own interests, then they have to contend with Balochistan as well as Kashmir. And third, in terms of their actual cultural existence, I think we've somewhat still a lot more evolved, because we can at least proudly call ourselves secular for, in many ways. Pakistan really can't claim that, right? Given all these things, plus the backdrop of where they sit in terms, as you said, gravitating towards more an Islamic republic versus where they started out, do you think Pakistan is more volatile than it's ever been since you've seen it? And really, is the introspection needed at their end in anger management to get the board level, or do you think that we need to introspect? Because I think our foreign policy in engagement has been fairly civil and justified. So
Yeah, I think your analysis is pretty accurate. This is what we've been talking about. of Pakistan's poly crisis. Whether this is the worst moment in its history, possibly yes, because now all the accumulated errors of its economic management have come home to roost. So the 40% inflation and the fact that the non-availability of goods and the fact that they can't make those structural reforms make it very hard for them. So clearly yes, and my argument has been that it's the ball is in Pakistan's court. It has to normalize itself before it has a normal relationship with India. So certainly what we advocate for India is smart policy to minimize the damage that could potentially be done by an imploding Pakistan. But for Pakistan, it's for its people, it's important to normalize itself for all these factors that you mentioned, including getting the army to play a smaller role in the politics.
Thank you, Ajay. You know, yeah, we're taking very quick questions. Ajay, I'll come to this in a minute. Let me, sir, please go ahead. And I want to just mention one thing. I know Ajay is facing this way. But is there any reason why this is the penumbra? There's been not a single question from this side. Yes, madam, you will get the microphone after this, sir. We'll take two questions, sir, you and madam, you there. Yes, sir. Quick questions, sir, because we are coming to an end.
Let's ask as many as possible.
You see, actually I was 15 when the partition took place, I know the refugees in Kotla, and we have been carrying food to them every day for a couple of months, and we've seen the horror they've gone through. Anyway, that's a past case. Now I'm thinking that maybe for better relation, the bribe might work. Everything has to work. The bribe might work in the sense that they are short of everything in Pakistan today. And the ordinary people are suffering. Maybe whatever item they are suffering, our government can give them free. They will give them 100 million a year things of goods if they don't send terrorists.
Thank you, sir. Ma'am, please go ahead. This freebie question is a very good one. It's the one which is raised in election times.
What about China?
We'll be accused of interference.
Thank you for a wonderful discussion. I haven't read your book, but the talk from Mr. Puri said that it has become from a Muslim state into an Islamic state. Now, I want to know from you when that actually happened, because we know about the Islamic state of Iran and we know the condition in Afghanistan, and we don't view Pakistan in the same way. So when did this happen? Because we've had wars, but those generals have not come across as Islamists or whatever the term is.
I think that is a foundational decision. Pakistan got its first constitution in 1956, and that talked of the Islamic Republic of Pakistan. And in some shape or form, in all its future constitutions, it has been, there was mention in their objectives resolution for their constitution of an Islamic Republic. There was also mention of, you have to be a Muslim to have any constitutional post. So it is the Islamic Republic of Pakistan. But the early debate and the interesting point we were trying to point out is that Jinnah, the founder, didn't quite buy that idea. His successors took it in a direction which he probably didn't intend, but Jinnah really hadn't planned the country. His plan was to get independence, and he didn't perhaps live long enough to plan the shape of the Pakistan they would create.
So I have a question. Where does China figure in all this meddling? Because it's obviously controlling the strings as up in the back.
So China is a very important factor in this relationship now and going forward. It has been, my enemy's enemy is my friend kind of strategic relationship from the 50s. But over a period of time, it became a relationship of acute military dependence. Pakistan doesn't have a missile program, that's Chinese. It didn't have a nuclear program, that's Chinese. It didn't have an air force, it was created by China. And now that relationship, which was of military dependence, strategic dependence, is one of abject economic dependence. China is the savior of Pakistan's economy. They had a project called the CPEC. from our point of view, the worry is in a scenario of what they now have what they call interoperability in their between their armies. So we have a situation where in the future you could have not just a two-front conflict, but a joint front conflict. And I think we have to war game that and be prepared for that in a military sense, certainly, but also in a diplomatic sense.
Ajay, thank you. You mentioned, sorry, thank you very much. Yes, please do. You're the boss.
No, because China is impacting all our neighbors. What are your views on that? Because you have Nepal on one side, you have Sri Lanka on one side, you have Pakistan. We seem to be being cornered.
So there's China.
Another three hours to get into that.
Can I just add one more? Since we did go beyond India, Pakistan, and our familial kind of thing, and we brought in China, I don't think this conversation would be complete in that sense if you left out the United States, because that Great Britain is 47 and nothing other than. So a very short touch on that, then we'll ask Mrs. Chip, because we're coming to the end, we must have her speak.
One...
Ma'am, straight away, please go ahead.
We have a very strong political will. We have a very strong army. We have the diplomatic people in place. We have this very knee-jerk going on. India will not pay Pakistan the cricket match. We will not have this sports activity. Visas are denied. I'm from the sports, so we had this problem many times. Visas are denied. Go slow on the visa till the date arrives, and then you can't go to Pakistan, or vice versa. With all the profound work by all the can we not reach something that sports could be put aside, or sports is part of this anger that comes? Oh, we go to.
Thank you, ma'am. Very good question. Can we manage it? Can we do an Adnan Sami on sports? Ajay, very quick touch by you, and then we'll ask her.
Okay, so let's address all these three questions. You asked about, for India, China is and will remain the primary strategic challenge for the next 2 decades. So it certainly is. From Pakistan's point of view, and all that China does in the neighborhood is something that we have to be acutely conscious of and deal with. But from Pakistan's point of view, when we look at its external relationships, what we call geopolitical rents, which is the money it gets for its strategic location, have dried up since the Americans left Afghanistan in August 2021. But when we ask about will Pakistan break up and fail and implode, you have the Pakistan army that will prevent that from happening over its dead body. But you also have 3 godfathers externally, and that is US, China, and Saudi Arabia, which consider it too big to fail, too nuclear to fail, and they will try to pitch in and help. On sports, sports, again, this is a debate. All neighborly relations, all relations with neighbors tend to be political, and the politics will come in. So you cannot have a situation where people-to-people contacts like culture or sport is untouched by the larger political relationship. So, you need the political relationship to unlock all those parts of the relationship. So you can't have a situation where it won't be touched. If you have a war with Pakistan of any sort, certainly there won't be any cricket match, nor will there be any singing and Bollywood. Fawad Khan coming to Bollywood will not happen at that point. But again, I think it's an important instrument of policy which we can use and deploy in good times.
Thank you, Ajay.
I think so many questions have been asked that I think hardly any question left, and it was a fantastic, I think, interaction, the two of you, and a very, very good lecture. I just want to say that my own experience was, like he said, I was born in Lahore. So was my mother. So, I grew up in Lahore, and so many years later when I go on our second posting, I don't know if that man was still there when you were there. His name was Peshori. He used to be a guard and all, Hindu, but that name.
No.
I just called out to him because a truck had come with Coca-Cola items, and I told him, we were having our first party, and I told him, Peshori, jaake kaam kariya hai kar. The driver came walking, rushing in, and he said, Begum Sahab, तुसी लाहौर दी पंजाबी बोल रहे हो. So it was a fantastic. I said, maybe because I was born there and I lived there till I was 10, but I didn't know. She said, yes, you are talking to Lahori Punjabi. So, and of course, the reason that he came running was because he said, you know, my wife wants to go to India, her relatives are there. I want a passport. So I said, go to the High Commission, they will give it to you. He said, nahi, wahan to bahar hamare chache baithe hain, the CID. So I can't go over there. Aap mujhe karwa de. Ultimately, I had to do it. He brought the passport and all. So you see, you have, but one thing I would say, I don't know why we in India keep this very nostalgic feeling about Pakistan. It is a new country. Another country, I think, and the Pakistanis also don't like, my feeling is, like you said, they don't want to be together. They want to be treated as a separate country and have that same, the way we treat in other countries, because why should we? But people sort of talk still of this nostalgia. I got this and I cried this, and there were tears in my eyes, that young girl who was talking about her grandmother. Maybe it was my mother who changed me, because when we had a terrible time during Pakistan, but when things were all right and we got to know that my father was all right, he was a doctor. Ultimately, he was the one who set up the All India Institute of Medical Sciences. But when in Amritsar, he was there, it was from Pakistan, because he got his job was even for a day not taken away. So it was my mother who told us, forget about the past. The past is gone. It's now a new country. It's a different country. I have forgotten about it. You will all, the children will also make new friends, make a new beginning and go on. And this I realized even when I went as as a diplomatic wife went back, that this is what, I could not live in the past, though I did meet a friend of mine, because when my father told me that we would be leaving Lahore for good, I cried the whole night. And I told him I couldn't leave my two friends, Azra and there was another one. I couldn't. And he said, you will have to. So I did. But it was in Murray that I met her on the stairs of, wonder if you went to Murray and if that thing was still there, it was like a tea house. One would go there. While climbing the steps, she was coming down and we saw each other, and we hugged like, sisters that we had been earlier. And it was and of course her husband knew what was happening. My husband, Ashok, didn't know what was happening because he knew my father. My father had treated his mother, and so it was a moment that it was. And then the whole evening we talked with them. We stayed with them in Lahore, but the police troubled them a hell of a lot. Till he became a very important man later. He was the owner of certain mills, and he became the honorary consul for Turkey. So the second time we went, things were easier. But thank you very much for an excellent, I can imagine what would be in the book. It is because what you have spoken and said, the both of you, has been one of the most interesting evenings we've had. And I think Sanjana would probably like.
Thank you very much. Let me just quickly react to that. I would fully agree with you that with Pakistan, we in India have to deal with Pakistan not as the way it was or the way we'd like it to be. We have to deal with it, Pakistan, as it is. It's a foreign country, we have to deal with it as it is. But I must end with a story. Madam Padma Chib is a character in my book. I've mentioned there was an anecdote, a fascinating anecdote which Mr. Dev Mukherjee told me about. And this has just captured the tension of the times because this is in 1971. There's a build-up going on of the war. The diplomats are posted in Islamabad, and you are part of a afternoon of a bridge group of the ladies in Mr. Mukherjee's home. And she was the wife of the DHC, and they were all together when the stone throwing mobs come in and they throw a stone. So Mrs. Mukherjee calls up Dev Mukherjee, please come immediately, these guys are coming. He comes home, he has 2 guns. He takes them out, puts them on his lap, and he says he's waiting for that mob to come. And he says, well, if they had broken in, terrible things would have happened. They called the police came, it didn't react first, then it tried to control it. But these are the kind of moments we face in diplomacy with this completely abnormal neighbor. That you have a ladies having a bridge club meeting, a bunch of hoodlums have come pelting stones, they've broken the window, they may come in, assault, kill, and here's a diplomat who had a gun, he's sitting there ready to shoot them if they came in. So, it could have gone in any direction at that point. And was it the same afternoon that the car was burnt? Yes. So what happens at the car of the Polish diplomat or
I think it was either
Bulgarian, Polish, I forget, it's in my book, of the diplomat's wife is put to fire by this arsonist mob. And they complain and it's horrible and so on. But the next day's newspapers say Dev Mukherjee called these people to his home and he set fire. He's the arsonist who set fire to this car. So, this is the situation he faced when we were there in the run-up.
I was very scared because, Bengali blood, I told them, for God's sake, they put your guns away, don't do anything. Just lock us up in the room, we are not going to do anything. And I think somehow the telephone was working and I called my husband and he also told him, he said, Dev, be careful, don't use the gun. In no circumstances are you going to...
But I wish I had spoken to you, I would have put that story down because, this is fascinating. But he was sitting there ready to use his gun.
Now I'm not sure about the car.
No, the car was, but the stoning reminded me terribly of the times that we went through in Pakistan. Not because fortunately I never had any bad incident because my family, except my father, we left for the mountains with my grandparents. But the thing was, every night was a tension where the men were standing there with lathis and all waiting. Other mobs are there and what we do.
Exactly. So I think that is what was fascinating about Dev Mukherjee's story. So he said that he spoke, Padma Chib told him that this is like 1947. So they are in 1971, 25 years later, and there is a moment exactly like 47. So, and this kind of stuff even happens to this day in this relationship. So that is why it's such an abnormal and also such a fascinating relationship.
But the people can be very good. I would go out, I don't know how, but they would recognize me in 10 minutes that I am from India. And they would ask me, and one of the fruit walas told me, to see they called always begums or begums are to see. But Pakistan, so then I think I must have told them that my grandparents were from Gujranwala. And from there we used to get red oranges. And he said, called me one afternoon and he told me, आपके ਤੁਹਾਡੇ ਦੇਸ਼ ਤੋਂ ਮਾਲਟੇ ਆਏ हैं लाल माल्टे और मैं ਤੁਹਾਨੂੰ एक पेटी भेज ਰਿਹਾ ਹਾਂ और एक भी अगर खट्टा निकलिया वापस कर देना this was the sort of thing and I said because when he said ਤੁਹਾਡੇ ਮੁਲਕ ਤੋਂ ਆਏ तो I said मेरा मुल्क तो मालटे ਤੋਂ आया मेरा तो मुल्क इंडिया है वो तो मालटे
Gujranwala. Yeah,
Isn't it fascinating, ma'am? It's the nature of this relationship. No matter, we use this particular expression, partition. High Commissioner Bisaria, if I may use an expression from somebody who lives in Vasant Vihar, it was a pleasure having you on this.
And I will second that. Thank you to both of you, and it's been such a pleasure listening to both of you.
About the time I was in split last year, and there was a Pakistani couple that we were talking to. At the end of it all, she says to me, आप दुआ कीजिए कि हमारा पाकिस्तान भी हिंदुस्तान जैसे तरक्की करे और मेरे दिल को इतनी ठंड लगी ना.
So, thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. That was such a fascinating conversation. I have to say that, you know, Pakistan is actually very close to Vasant Vihar's heart. We've had umpteen conversations regarding this, and such emotional, personal stories come out, like what Mrs. Chib has just shared, that, you know, you have tears flowing in our eyes. Also, you know, what you said, that young people are losing touch. You're right about that, because I think they cannot emote with that emotion, that pain which happened, you know, when the country was partitioned. But on a happy note, let's hope that this knot can be, you know, opened, and we have going forward a better relationship. I wouldn't say a perfect relationship, but a better relationship, and the anger comes under management. And with that, thank you, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you to our guests, Ambassador Bisaria and Ambassador Puri. I would like to get a photograph taken with everybody here, so if you could just come around here. Yeah, and the books are on sale there, and the author is here to sign them if you would like. But please come here and we'll just get a photo done quickly. Thank you. And I hope you have had a lovely evening. A round of applause for our guests.